If we withdrew from Vietnam, the communists would control Vietnam. Pretty soon, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and all of Southeast Asia would be under the control of the communists and under the domination of the Chinese.
Some people running along the dikes. Roger. Good job. I saw you splatter one right in the back with a rocket. Roger, got lucky again.
It's time that we recognized ours was in truth a noble cause.
Everybody get off the middle of this LZ.
Throughout the years of negotiations, we have insisted on peace with honor. Let us be proud of the young Americans who served with honor and distinction.
A retreat of the United States from Vietnam would be a communist victory of massive proportions and would lead to World War III.
"20 years ago this week, I reported the end of the Vietnam War from here, the American Embassy in Saigon, where the last American troops fled from this helicopter pad on the roof. The American invasion of Vietnam had marked the last stage of the longest war this century, a war in which the greatest tonnage of bombs in history was dropped, in which more than 2 million Vietnamese were killed and a bountiful land devastated. This film is not just about an anniversary, but will try to rescue something of Vietnam's past and present from Hollywood images that have pitied the invader while overshadowing one of the epic national struggles of the 20th century. Above all, it's about a remarkable people who have paid a high price for their victory over a superpower. Indeed, the terms of their long-awaited peace are still being negotiated. This is 1965. US Marines land at China Beach near Da Nang in central Vietnam. One Marine who followed them was Lieutenant Robert Muller, who was decorated for bravery before being shot through the spine. We took him back to China Beach. Did you feel when you arrived here in Da Nang that you were fighting the good fight against communism?
Absolutely. I chose Vietnam, and I chose infantry. And I absolutely believed that we were here to repel this massive communist invasion from the north on the freedom-loving people of the south. And it didn't take long, actually fighting the war over here, to have that explode into the myth that it was, you know, confronting the reality of what was going on in this country.
Do you remember when that first struck you?
Yeah, when I arrived at the airport right up here in Da Nang and had all of these people in black pajamas running around the airport, and I said, wait a second, I thought people in black pajamas were supposed to be the Viet Cong and the enemy. What the hell are they doing all over the airport? I'm serious. Vietnam was a lie. It was a lie from the beginning, throughout the war, and even today, as they're trying to write it into the history books, it's a lie. You know, a lot of people that came over here, and there were 3 million US servicemen here, you know, confronted the reality.
Vietnam has a secret history that is full of irony. It was here in the center of Hanoi on September the 2nd, 1945, that the great nationalist Ho Chi Minh declared independence from the French. All men, he began, are created equal, endowed with the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ho took those words straight from the American Declaration of Independence. And when he asked the crowd filling the square, "Do you hear me, comrades?" his appeal was also directed at the United States. Indeed, he resisted accepting aid from both China and the Soviet Union, while he sent secret messages to Washington, to which he received not a single reply. Instead, and incredibly, America cast Vietnam as part of a Chinese-led communist conspiracy, and on the basis of this mockery of the truth, began 30 years of war. This is Mrs. Tai Thi Tin, aged 84, whose life exemplifies the suffering of her country in the 20th century. She lost 5 of her 8 children. Her husband died resisting the French when Vietnam was a French colony. Her 2 eldest sons were killed fighting the French, and her youngest son was killed fighting the Americans. This century, the Vietnamese have been invaded by the French, the Japanese, the British, the Americans, the Cambodians under Pol Pot, and the Chinese. They have seen them all off at huge cost. There are many like Mrs. Tin.
Đây là ảnh của chú Mai Lâm, người con lớn của tôi. Thế thì Lâm thì khi đó thì là công binh phá bom thì chiến đấu ở tức là Tây Bắc, Cao Bắc Lạng trở về dự cái trận Điện Biên Phủ thì đóng ở Sơn La Cò Nòi thì chôn cất ngay ở cái Sơn La. Thế đây là Lương. Thế thì nó thương tôi quá, nó đi thì tiễn nó ra ga thì chỉ biết là nắm cái tay con thôi. Thế tôi thì cứ nước mắt chảy quanh, nhưng mà nghĩ con đi chiến đấu mà khóc thì làm nhụt lòng của nó. Thế tôi cũng không khóc. Thì nó đi từ Củ Chi thì chiến đấu thì là không có thư từ gì cả. Thế thì trong lúc vào Nam như thế là ở nhà thì mẹ phải cẩn thận, cảnh giác máy bay ném bom thì mẹ phải ấy.
En voici les toutes premières images rapportées de Hanoï. 4 arrondissements étaient touchés par les bombes. Malgré les informations transmises par le correspondant permanent de l'agence France-Presse à Hanoï, Washington ne reconnut les faits qu'après plusieurs démentis.
In 1966, America began the longest campaign in the history of aerial bombardment, aimed at North Vietnam. The fact that civilians were targeted was reported by very few Western journalists, among them James Cameron and Harrison Salisbury. Salisbury, an American, was vilified as a traitor. The tonnage of bombs dropped was many times greater than Hiroshima. This is Hong Gai, a coal mining and fishing town on the Gulf of Tonkin. The bombing here was more concentrated than even Dresden. Day after day, week after week, American carrier-based planes came in low over one of the most beautiful landscapes in Asia. I was one of the few outsiders to see the results. At this Catholic church, Mass had just finished when it was destroyed by a direct hit.
Khoảng vào lúc 7 giờ 30 thì lúc đó có tiếng báo động và chúng tôi chỉ kịp nghe cái tiếng ào một cái và tiếng rít của tiếng bom và coi như là bom Mỹ nổ. Nhưng mà lúc bây giờ tôi vẫn chưa biết rằng thì là nhà thờ đã mất hay chưa, nhưng chỉ biết là cái nóc nhà tôi là bay ngói hết rồi và coi như các cái tường là sập hết rồi.
When I came here in 1975, I found this letter pinned to a classroom wall in the rubble of the school. It read, "My name is Nguyen Tian. I am 15 years old. When I heard the air raid siren and the explosions, I hurried to the shelters. When I came out, my sister was lying there. She had pins all over her. The street where this family lived was hit by a new kind of bomb that sprayed small darts about the size of a pin. The darts had entered Tian's sister and continued to move about in her body for several days, causing her an agonizing death. They were made from a synthetic material difficult to detect under X-ray. They've since been used in wars from the Middle East to the Falklands to the Gulf, having been successfully tested here. The end of the war came almost by surprise. When America finally turned off the life support machine that had kept the Saigon regime going, the South Vietnamese army collapsed under the burden of its own corruption and reticence. They never had their heart in it, and they left only boots and graves. The last day embodied all the black farce of the war itself. The American evacuation signal was the playing of Bing Crosby singing, "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas." The last American ambassador to preside over this fortress was Graham Martin, a reclusive man who had lost his own son in the war and believed that America could never be beaten. A great tree dominated the embassy grounds and would have to be cut down if the big helicopters, known as the Jolly Green Giants, were to start the evacuation. Martin had refused to cut it down, saying, "Once that tree falls, America's prestige will fall with it." But as the hours ticked by, his staff began to fell the tree and to burn everything of value. I was standing here in the embassy courtyard, and through the smoke billowing out of the incinerator on the roof, I saw dollar bills fluttering down. 20s, 50s, 100s. Most of them were charred, but some were as good as the day they were printed. The Vietnamese waiting to be evacuated couldn't believe their eyes. Former ministers, generals, and torturers of the old American-backed regime scrambled for their severance pay from the sky or sent their children to retrieve the notes. All $5 million were hauled in sacks onto the roof to be burned, on whose orders no one could say. "I can tell you just this," said one embassy official. "Every safe in this building has been emptied and locked again so as to fool the gooks when we've gone." It was 2:30 a.m. when Secretary of State Henry Kissinger phoned Ambassador Martin and ordered him to leave. He packed the Stars and Stripes in a carrier bag and walked to the roof. At 5:20 a.m. the last Marines locked these gates, leaving behind terrified Vietnamese still waiting to be evacuated. The Marines ran frantically to the roof, to the last helicopter. Three hours later, as the sun beat down on Saigon, tanks flying the colors of the National Liberation Front entered the center of the city. Their jubilant crews showed no menace nor fired a single shot. The war was over. With the Americans finally gone, Vietnam was made an international pariah. The United States mounted an embargo that covered both trade and humanitarian aid and used its influence to sabotage loans from the World Bank that would have prevented starvation. One of Margaret Thatcher's first acts in coming to power was to ban shipments of powdered milk to Vietnamese children. The Hanoi government had hoped to end their dependence on the Soviet Union, but the blockade gave them nowhere else to turn. Such were the spoils of victory. For several years, the boat people, those who fled the austerity and repression of the post-war years, occupied the headlines. But now the return of tens of thousands of boat people has gone almost unnoticed. Under a program sponsored by the European Community, an historic act of reconciliation has taken place. I suppose the impression people would get from the headlines of all those years about the boat people that if they went back they might be victimized. Have you had any evidence of that at all?
None whatsoever, I'm very pleased to say. And I've traveled very extensively throughout, indeed, all 21 provinces where our program operated, from which something like 98% of the boat people emanated. And I've met thousands of returnees in all sorts of situations. And I've come across not one instance of that happening. The Vietnamese generally are a very kindly people, and I think people went out of their way here to ensure that those who came back didn't lose face as a result of doing so.
Mấy năm bên đó thì mình có một cái cảm tưởng, nó có cái mặc cảm, tức là bị xa rời tổ quốc rồi thiếu thốn tình cảm, rồi hơn nữa là cũng sẽ có những cái mà cũng có thể là tự mình nghĩ ra thôi, Đấy, tức là cái mặc cảm nó có một cái gì đó mình cảm thấy rằng là gần như là sợ. Đấy. Nhưng mà về thì nó lại khác hẳn như thế. Đấy, cho nên là điều cũng đáng phấn khởi như vậy.
In the late 1980s, the Vietnamese government declared a policy they called Doi Moi, or Our Way. The aim was to break out of the economic siege. The so-called free market was embraced, foreigners were welcomed, and the embargo began to crumble. At the same time, personal freedom was encouraged, and people began to speak and criticize openly. As a friend of mine put it, colour returned to our lives. But behind the move towards greater personal liberty were dramatic changes in the economy. These were based on the belief, or the delusion, that the rapid growth of a new consumer class could bring prosperity to all. Today, Vietnam has been declared an open marketplace, and its people a cheap labour pool, with wages for skilled work as low as £20 a month. As one American banker put it, the circus is back in town. In other words, a carve-up is taking place. America effectively runs the currency. Japan dominates the money lending, Singapore the property market, and Taiwan and Korea the sweatshops. The French and Australians are doing nicely too, with the British not far behind. And as the roads fill up and the air pollutes, the Vietnamese sink deep into debt to those who once profited from their suffering.
I think life has been much easier and more pleasant because there's a lot more freedom. And economically speaking, everybody's life has been improved. And for me personally, since then, I've been much more able to do my professional work.
Before 75, though, you were neither with the old regime nor with the communists.
No, but I was a nationalist. I was for peace, and I was for true national independence.
Right. Now, it seems to me that capitalism has arrived almost with a bang. What are the dangers?
Many.
Can you tell me?
Of losing our soul, of losing what we have gained with so much sacrifice, meaning losing this ideology of justice, of equality and so on.
Vietnam represents to you a hybrid model, a model in which we have combined the best of both worlds to build our country here. Short of a better term, I used to call it market socialism.
Isn't that a contradiction in terms?
It's not a contradiction. It is a harmonious blending of the best of the two worlds to build Vietnam.
The glamorous aspect of the Western culture, of the bad side, of the worst side of Western culture seem to be more attractive, like materialism, consumerism, all that is now very, very attractive to the people to whom all this is new.
When you open the doors for new winds to come in, dust would come in with it. We try to keep the dust out.
That's an old Vietnamese saying.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. You see, an American investor told me the other day, he said, look, forget about this being a socialist country. Give it time, it'll be another capitalist country.
Let's hope so.
Foreigners discovering Vietnam have little contact with the countryside where 90% of the people live, and where for all the hardship there was once equality. The new free market policies are changing all that. Some of the first reforms were welcomed, but under a law drafted by the World Bank, the old system of rich landowners and tenant farmers is coming back. The system that Ho Chi Minh fought against, and in doing so won the support of the majority. At this village in the south, they used to share everything. Now cooperatives are a thing of the past, and a middleman has moved in, paying this woman and her 12-year-old daughter $1 a day between them to make beach mats for export. They work from 5 in the morning till 5 at night, and as education is no longer free, the girl has to work to pay for her lessons. It is the people, said Ho Chi Minh, who must have priority. His name may soon become an embarrassment for those in power claiming his legacy. The secret history of Vietnam was also the chemical war, the spraying of a deadly poison called dioxin. Its aim was to destroy the forests where the Viet Cong were, and it was confined to South Vietnam, which America had come to save. The spraying was called Operation Hades and was hardly reported at the time. And when it was changed to the friendlier Operation Ranch Hand, and the spraying continued. Dioxin is 1,000 times more powerful than thalidomide.
I saw many forests destroyed, died. Only the dead tree, nothing, no animals, no birds. About 2 million hectares of the tropical forests of our country completely destroyed by herbicide.
These American soldiers are hosing down vegetation with that poisonous herbicide. Half of Vietnam's mangrove forests were destroyed in this way. In 1970, the US Senate was told, the United States has dumped on South Vietnam a quantity of toxic chemical amounting to 6 pounds for every man, woman, and child. These men are planting trees in one of the world's most remarkable regreening campaigns. Every school child in Vietnam plants at least 1 tree a year. In this way, millions of hectares of forest have been reclaimed, with little outside help and few resources. It is one of Vietnam's greatest post-war achievements. And this is the result. The earth has come alive again. The human cost of the chemical war is all too evident. Deformed children are more likely to be conceived in Vietnam than almost anywhere in the world. In 1994, the link between the herbicide known as Agent Orange and cancer was confirmed by the Australian government. American and Australian veterans have now been compensated for what Agent Orange did to them. The Vietnamese have received nothing. Hospitals like this one have appealed for the most basic equipment and have been ignored. Last year, how many malformed babies were born in this hospital?
Last year we have 266 case malformation.
266?
Yeah, in the hospital.
And you've been getting that kind of figure over the years, haven't you?
I think it's not higher, but it's the same.
About the same?
The same.
Since, I think, about the end of the 1960s, is that correct? It started to go up.
Yes, started to go up.
In 1978, President Jimmy Carter rejected an appeal for aid for Vietnam. He said, "The damage was mutual. We owe them nothing." This is a copy of a top-secret letter drafted by American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and signed by President Nixon on February the 1st, 1973. It was part of a deal negotiated by Kissinger with Hanoi in this building while the war was still going on. In exchange for a ceasefire, during which Nixon was to announce he'd achieved a great breakthrough, the Vietnamese were promised more than $3 billion. In effect, reparations for the American invasion and the devastation of their country. Not a penny of this was ever paid. Instead, the American trade embargo was only lifted by President Clinton last year, and then only after the Vietnamese were compelled to pay $140 million, the sum of war debts incurred by the American client regime in Saigon, which they defeated 20 years ago. "20 years ago, Hanoi was a Trappist monk and Saigon was a whore with a hangover. With the new invasion, the North is being changed beyond recognition. Soon only foreigners will be able to afford the elite living on Hanoi's beautiful West Lake. The first golf clubs and exclusive resorts have opened, with the Vietnamese as caddies. The Hanoi Club, now under construction, offers membership fees ranging from $6,500 to $15,000. Cash, check or Visa. But hurry, membership is strictly limited.
What's the idea of the club? Because it seems to be an extraordinary aberration in a luxury place in Hanoi, and Hanoi is anything but a luxury city.
Well, you see, my main line is not clubs. It's building office buildings and retail centres and apartment blocks and stuff like that. And in order to make those prosper, you've got to be confident that there'll be a decent expatriate population. And one of the first things expatriates look for is lifestyle, environment, sport, recreation. And there was absolutely nothing here. So with my contacts, we found this beautiful site. And the idea grew from there.
Your membership rates look pretty high.
Modest, sir, modest. I mean,
well, I couldn't afford $6,500 for a club, but I mean, who are the people that
corporations.
Vietnamese?
No. Australians, Brits, Canadians, Yanks, the whole lot.
Yeah. But how many Vietnamese members will you have?
So far, 4. But again, there's a lot of money in Vietnam. There's a lot of new Vietnamese money. And in time, we will see them as members too. Yeah. And I make no apologies for the fact that it's exclusive, because these things will only work if they're exclusive.
I mean, are they the government? Are they going to be ripped off, do you think?
Yeah, sure. They already have been. Brokers putting deals together, knocking down buildings and then disappearing because they couldn't find the cash, because banks don't lend, you know, all the usual Mad Hatter stuff that happens at the beginning of something like this. It's part of the education program of converting into this wonderful world of capitalism we now have.
We have an SECI license to build a 15-story office tower, okay, and that office tower will have hopefully 2 mini theaters for movie theaters and could be used for conference centers. Then we figured about 11 stories for office space. I would love to have on the 12th story a health club with an indoor running track on it overlooking the West Lake here, and then the roof have a rooftop restaurant and bar.
Is this mainly for expatriate companies?
I would assume they're the ones that are going to be able to afford that. I mean, it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be cheap rent or anything.
Do you see it at least as ironic that here you are, a good, full-blooded capitalist organization dealing and going to make undoubtedly a good buck in a sort of joint venture effectively with a communist government? You reflected on that?
Yeah, well, let's put it this way, John. We haven't made any money yet. You know, see, Vietnam, what a lot of people don't understand is that you're coming in here with the money also, okay? And you have to spend the time and the effort and the money to get.
But in the end, I mean,
well, I certainly hope so.
You're not here for philanthropic reasons. I mean,
I hope not. No. I mean, if it doesn't work out, I can always work in the rice paddies, I guess.
Sure,
you know,
sure. Yeah.
I can make a couple of bucks there.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Do you think there's I suppose, a danger that all those foreigners that this country has been repelling this century, French, Japanese, Americans, British, might, by other means, end up achieving what they're unable to achieve through war? I mean, you're all back.
Yeah, we're all back.
You're all
right.
back, peacefully. Is that possible, do you think?
I guess the way you put it has a good sound to it. Good meaning. Yeah, that's a good possibility, isn't it? Yeah, never thought of it that way. Yeah.
At the Paris Peace Conference in 1973, the United States agreed to clean up its unexploded bombs and landmines in Vietnam. Nothing was done. If the Americans bombed people in South Vietnam in order to save them from communism, their largely unreported bombing of the communist North was for less altruistic reasons. When I came here to North Vietnam in 1975, I felt like somebody who'd stumbled on some great unrecorded disaster. I found a moonscape from which incessant bombing had obliterated all visible signs of life: houses, factories, schools, pagodas, churches and hospitals. This was the Bac Mai Hospital in Hanoi, the morning after President Nixon's Christmas bombing in 1972. Doctors, nurses and patients were killed and injured. One of the survivors was Professor Zhang.
I first came here in 1972.
So you came here just before the bombing?
Yes. First, I work in the intensive care unit.
Right.
I remember.
Professor Zhang sheltered with his patients under these stairs. This frail and noble man is typical of those who built a unique national health service that was so successful that child mortality was cut to a rate comparable with rich countries, and common disease was greatly reduced. Today, much of the health service has been privatized. The better off are meant to pay for the poor, but the system is often pay or die. Vietnam, admits the World Bank, now has a higher proportion of underweight and stunted children than in any country in Southeast Asia except Bangladesh. Once again, deaths from malaria are common, and patients are often two to a bed. Doctors are paid as little as £8 a month. Just to raise cash, the Ministry of Health runs ballroom dancing on Friday nights.
Before, everything is free. The government pay everything for the patients. But in the new system, insurance pay for patients who has insurance, and other patients, they have to pay themselves. But among these poor patients, when there is some difficulties, the director of the hospital sometimes pay for it.
I see. In the countryside, it was the cooperative that paid for the local health clinic, where women could have their babies in relative safety. It also paid for the village school. But now that cooperatives have gone, so too is another of Vietnam's proudest achievements: universal education that produced a literacy rate of 90%, one of the highest in the world. Today, education is no longer free. 750,000 children have been pushed out of the system, which is being tailored to the needs of the new labour market. In January, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kenneth Clark, came to Hanoi with a group of British businessmen. There was the usual anodyne excitement about mutual benefit for the two countries. But this guide to British investors, produced by the Department of Trade and Industry in London, is rather more frank. Vietnam, it makes clear, is a gold mine. And why? Because people here are so cheap, the wages so low. The Vietnamese, it says, can provide a new industrial home for ailing British products. Moreover, UK firms can rejuvenate tired-old products here by slashing costs. Take the long view, advises the British government. Use Vietnam's weaknesses. Vietnam's open door invites you to take advantage of its low standard of living and low wages. Reading that, I have to say that sounds more like exploitation than investment.
It sounds like exploitation because put that way. Because you can provide inexpensive labor. I don't call that cheap labor. I call it inexpensive labor. Then your cost of production will be competitive on the international market.
We are now offering cheap labor because of lack of experience, because sometimes vested interest and maybe sometime out of necessity.
See, in Saigon, from what I can understand, a lot of these new foreign joint venture factories are employing young women, 15 to 21.
25, yes.
Cheap labor, classic situation of cheap labor to be found all over the third world.
Exact.
That seems to me almost tragic.
Yes. It's also tragic for me. Yes.
These ancient looms are reminiscent of machines used in the cotton towns of Lancashire 70 years ago. The young women working them get a basic rate of £12 a month and work up to 12 hours a day. If they fall behind a minimum target, they are sacked. The air is foul, the noise incessant, and the only protection from injury is a hair curler. The factory manager, who's from Taiwan, cheerfully admitted that there were no safety precautions. "We have a medical centre for accidents," he said. "The law says there should be a union. We haven't got one yet," he said. This is the brave new world of what they call an EPZ, which stands for Export Processing Zone. This one near Saigon is run by a company from Taiwan and will accommodate 100,000 workers employed by foreign companies. It will be, in effect, a city-state, with dormitories for female workers, a stock exchange, its own customs, and all the profits will be shipped out of Vietnam. In the new Vietnam, the army has also turned itself into a business and runs the scene of one of its triumphs as a kind of theme park. Here girls dress up as Viet Cong, guiding tourists through the bomb craters and requesting them not to step on the new grass. This is Cu Chi near Saigon, where the Viet Cong built a system of tunnels that helped them win the war. The original tunnels were half this size and have been widened to accommodate large tourists. During the war, Vietnamese soldiers crawled through insects and snakes, and with bombs falling overhead. More than 200,000 are still listed as missing in action. For $1 a shot, tourists can even play their own war games. There's a choice of an American gun or a Viet Cong gun. And if you hit a bullseye, you win a genuine black and white Viet Cong scarf. And here's another happy winner. Most tourist buses don't come here because the road is too bumpy. This is My Lai, where more than 200 people were massacred by American troops on March the 16th, 1968. Mrs. Ha Thi Quy is 70 years old. Her 3 children were murdered in a ditch as she lay wounded beneath their bodies.
Gia đình bả ngừ, coi như là đêm ra bén trước hết, cũng bắt cái xuống đó coi như bén ở đằng chỗ đây mà bén biết rồi đó, bả bà con rồi cháu rồi mẹ rồi cha chết bả ngừ y xì, cứ thấy sợ quá, không biết làm sao, không biết nghĩ sao ấy. Chết trận này là chết chứ không có sống. Mà hiện nó bê lọt đây nữa, đây có một đường thôi, đây đi tới đây cái là con bán xuống đó, rồi ở đảng rồi cái nghĩ cái đây đi xuống đây cái là con bán, hiện người nào bị thương mà ngắt cái đầu là nó bán thôi, nó không có kể gì, nó bán như vậy. Rồi tới cái chừng mà
For the crime at My Lai, one junior American officer went to jail for 4.5 months. Vietnam was said to be the first media war in which there was saturation coverage, but this was always a misleading impression. At the time of the massacre here at My Lai, there were more than 600 correspondents in Saigon, but only a handful of them ever left the city. And the story of the massacre was suppressed in the United States for more than a year, until it was finally published and represented as both an aberration and an American tragedy, a theme that Hollywood was later to take up. Indeed, the walls of the offices of foreign news organizations in Saigon were often papered with photographs like these, hundreds of photographs that were never sent and never published. For the truth is that the nature of the war itself was atrocious, a story that Hollywood is still to tell. The history of the war has been rewritten by Hollywood with a series of films that have blended Rambo and self-pity, a potent combination. The message has been sometimes crude and sometimes subtle, but always the same. America made mistakes, but it was really the fault of the Vietnamese for defending their country. In other words, the crusade was flawed, but it was a noble one, just as the Hollywood actor Ronald Reagan said it was.
I think the drip, drip, drip of what may be now 10 films, the selectivity of the image of the war, or the images of the war, the subjectivity, don't forget those films, they've almost all been subjective movies, has created an image which is going to take generations and generations to eradicate.
But it's quite a stark image in some respects, isn't it?
I don't think, John, that it's an image which allows any sense of the Vietnamese through. I mean, the Vietnamese are figures in a landscape.
I still think those movies are very offending. Those movies basically is not to let people know what the Vietnamese people are about. They just want to see what the American is about, or the American viewpoint of the Vietnamese is about.
It's not the truth.
Come on, it's not. I mean, you gotta be crazy to believe that. And I truly hate them with a passion.
We gotta call it in.
Yet these purging fables of Hollywood have become, by default, our popular history, deceiving a generation.
I've seen Platoon, Missing in Action, Born on the 4th of July, Hamburger Hill, and Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah. None of these films have been about the Vietnamese, have they?
No, they haven't. I mean, I suppose it's a bias. They're trying to sort of say that it's all evil, you know, it's all the Vietnamese fault. You know, they're the ones who sort of started it. They're the ones, I mean, they showed, I suppose, the Vietnamese in a very bad light as well because of all the torture. And the fact that, you know, the Vietnamese, when they were captured, they tried to sort of commit suicide rather than actually be tortured or held as prisoner. Whereas, you know, our men were put in... I remember reading something, actually, on men who were tortured. They were laid in these bamboo cages.
Those cages and the Russian roulette scene in Deer Hunter have now almost become fact. Whereas Cimino himself had finally admitted none of it happened, and none of us who were there could ever remember anything like that happening.
No one ever set out, I don't think, to create a great untruth, but because of the lack of balance and because of the demands and the constraints of the dramatic medium, we're buggered.
But isn't it about Hollywood as well? Not just the feature film as such?
I don't think it's about Hollywood. I think in that sense it's about America. I think America is a strange, complex country, fascinating country, which in a childlike way is only able to deal with certain truths. This is a nation that can't deal with complexity. We like our truths, but we like them simple, and if necessary we'll have them distorted.
You've had the culture, and then you've had, you know, really a lot of influence out of the office of the president, particularly under Reagan, you know, exploiting all of these negative issues like the missing in action, prisoner of war issue, to portray the Vietnamese as vile, rotten, evil people holding our boys in bamboo cages. You know, those are emotional buttons in America that have been pushed very successfully. You've had Hollywood come in and exploit that with movies like Rambo, Uncommon Valor, MIA, and on and on and on and on. And you have now in America, when you mention Vietnam, something that people think of in mythical terms. You know, Vietnam is a war. You know, it's a set of emotions. It's not a country. of 72 million people. You know, it doesn't connect. The reality of what, you know, we know to be here, Vietnam, isn't in any way at all connected to America. It's just not.
Vietnam's greatest resource is not money, nor factories, nor tourism, but people. And as most people come from the countryside, it's clear that true prosperity will come not from turning this into an industrial sweatshop, but from a modern agricultural-based economy that sustains the nation and the environment. This way, Vietnam could be a model for developing countries. This is not idealistic. All over Asia, the real cost of the so-called tiger economies is there to see, in polluted cities and rivers, and stolen forests, in people racing to make more and more goods for export, and to pay more and more interest on debt. When the financial pages say approvingly that Vietnam is now exporting rice, what they don't say is that people here are going hungry. And when Vietnam's leaders say the World Bank knows best, what they don't say is that their history makes clear that the sources of discontent that challenged injustice in the past can return. Perhaps that's why beggars and other very poor people are being swept off the streets of Saigon and sent to detention centers, and why anti-government Buddhist leaders, reminiscent of those who helped topple the old regimes, are prisoners of conscience. It is ironic that the only censorship we encountered in making this film was official concern that my interviews with the survivors of the American massacre at My Lai might offend the United States and hold back American investment. Certainly, to Americans coming here, what is striking is that ordinary people bear them no grudge. Many say they cannot understand this generosity, just as many could not understand how such a people could resist America's power.
You know, I feel that Americans are obsessed with their own failure at their own past, and they have not recovered from this failure. Why we are looking ahead, we're working for the future, and we forget. We really forget about this period. And we have so many other things to think of.
Why are the Vietnamese able to forget and America isn't?
Because we didn't lose. We won. We lost, materially speaking, but spiritually we have won. And we're losing a little bit now, but we will win again.
The other day, the Americans were given back this embassy building in Saigon. They gave little in return. "We have smashed this country to bits," wrote Telford Taylor, the chief American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, "and we will not even take the trouble to clean up the blood and rubble." He was referring not to Germany, but to Vietnam. In order to rebuild their country, the Vietnamese have been finally granted a place in the New World Order, but only on certain conditions. They must first create a society based on exploited labor and divisions of rich and poor. A society in which achievements in health and education will not be valued as before, and freedom will be sold as a commodity with a bottom line. In other words, the kind of foreign-imposed society they sacrifice so much to get rid of. Certainly, if Vietnam does not resolve these issues to the benefit of all its people, it will be one of the great tragedies of modern history. So perhaps the most difficult battle of all has only just begun. And this being Vietnam, it is far from lost.